She just wanted a quiet night with her textbook. He thought she was an escort, one mistake, and their lives changed forever. Before we continue, we ask you to support our channel by liking this video and subscribing. Your participation is essential for us to keep bringing you captivating stories like this one. The air in Chicago on that particular Thursday morning in late October carried the raw, damp promise of an early winter. It was a biting cold that swept off Lake Michigan, weaving through the canyons of steel and glass in the loop, a tangible presence that seemed to hurry the city's inhabitants along their way. Within the gleaming obsidian tower that served as the global headquarters for Ethelgard Holdings, one of the largest and most formidable private equity firms in the Midwest, the air was entirely different. A sterile, climate-controlled chill that smelled of filtered water, expensive cologne, and a relentless ambition that knew no seasons. It was in this rarefied, impersonal atmosphere that Ilara Vance, at 23, moved with the quiet discretion of a forgotten file, a ghost in a machine built on visibility and aggression. As a junior archivist in the sprawling subterranean labyrinth of corporate records, Ilara was one of the countless anonymous, easily replaceable cogs that ensured the colossal mechanism of Ethelgard functioned. Her presence was so unassuming, her routine so methodical and predictable, that most of her colleagues, absorbed in their own frantic climbs up the corporate ladder, would scarcely notice if she vanished for a week. Yet behind the facade of shyness, the almost apologetic posture, and the gaze that often studied the polished floor, resided a mind of astonishing acuity and analytical power. It was a raw, brilliant talent that, for lack of opportunity, of mentorship, and most critically of a stage upon which to perform, remained dormant, a flawless diamond stored in a dusty shoebox in the back of a forgotten closet. Ilara's life had been, from an early age, a quiet succession of battles fought in silence and responsibilities that had forced a premature maturity upon her slender shoulders. Having lost her mother at 12 to a swift and devastating illness that doctors had misdiagnosed until it was too late, she was raised by her grandmother, Maeve, a woman with a spine of steel and a heart of immense warmth, but whose body was now slowly succumbing to the weight of her years and a chronic respiratory condition that demanded constant care and costly medications. They lived in a small, weathered brick two-flat in Pilsen, a neighborhood vibrant with murals and the scent of authentic cooking, a world away from the cold austerity of the Loop. From the age of 16, Ilara had learned to juggle her studies, which she pursued with a near-religious devotion, with part-time jobs to help support their home and ensure her grandmother lacked for nothing. Her great and secret dream, the one she nurtured in the silent, lonely hours of the night, was to one day attend medical school. It was a passion born from the trauma of watching her mother fade away, a passion solidified by the daily tender act of caring for Maeve. In her precious few moments of leisure, she would lose herself in second-hand copies of Gray's Anatomy and textbooks on cellular biology, purchased with spare change from a dusty bookshop on 18th Street. She sought to decipher the sacred mysteries of the human body, absorbing every piece of knowledge with the ravenous hunger of one who thirsts to heal, to make a difference. To her colleagues at Ethelgard, she was just the quiet girl from the archives. The whispers she overheard, when she overheard anything at all, were echoes of her own invisibility. She's a hard worker, sure, but she has zero presence. She'll never make connections, one analyst might murmur to another by the coffee machine. No ambition. She'll be an archivist forever. Doesn't have the killer instinct you need to survive here, a supervisor once dictated in a performance review she wasn't meant to see. She absorbed it all silently, never letting the casual cruelty pierce her armor. She knew her journey was a different one. Her value wasn't measured by her ability to network in a corporate shark tank, but by the quiet strength with which she faced life's hardships and the unconditional love she poured into her grandmother. The firm was merely a stopover, a means to an end, the necessary rung on a ladder that led not to a corner office, but hopefully one day to a world of healing and purpose. Ilara's universe, however, was on a collision course with that of Julian Croft, the man who dwelled at the very apex of that pyramid of power and calculated indifference. At 36, Julian was the CEO and heir to the Ethelgard Empire, a man who, by all appearances, commanded the world from his fingertips, possessed of a classical, intimidating beauty and a reputation for being ruthless in business and devastatingly fickle in his personal affairs. He had reached the summit of his profession too young. Perhaps because of this, his eyes held a profound weariness, a cynicism that aged him beyond his years. His life was a blur of international flights, hostile takeovers, and superficial entanglements with breathtaking women who seemed curated from the pages of luxury magazines. He often returned from these trips exhausted, disoriented by the sycophantic receptions and hollow social obligations his position demanded, retreating to his sprawling penthouse on the Gold Coast, a sanctuary of glass, steel, and profound solitude overlooking the vast, grey expanse of the lake. The only person who seemed capable of penetrating his armor of indifference, albeit with a brand of humor Julian found grating, was his best friend and the firm's COO, Finian "Finn" O'Connell. Finn had a peculiar tradition of gifting Julian for his birthday with special consultants, a glib euphemism for high-class escorts hired for an evening. It was a juvenile prank Julian secretly despised, yet he accepted it with a cynical resignation, viewing it as just another symptom of the transactional emptiness of his relationships. The fateful twist began to unfold with a piece of news that at first felt like an impossible dream to Ilara. Due to her impeccable organization and silent efficiency on an internal data migration project, a project that had saved the company a significant sum and which, by a rare stroke of luck, had come to the attention of the board, she was unexpectedly chosen to join a small team at a major industry conference. The event was to be held at a historic, ultra-exclusive lodge in the North Woods of Wisconsin. The opportunity was staggering, a chance to learn, to see a different world, and the financial bonus attached was enough to cover Grandma Maeve's medical treatments for the next 6 months. Ilara was in a state of shock, a dizzying mix of elation and paralyzing panic. The thought of flying for the first time, of staying in a place she'd only ever seen in glossy travel magazines, of mingling with the titans of finance and industry, terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. She spent days preparing, reading up on the speakers and topics, carefully selecting the few formal outfits she owned, feeling like Cinderella about to attend a ball to which she was not truly invited. Arriving at the sprawling lakeside resort with its majestic timber frame construction, crackling stone fireplaces, and breathtaking views of the autumn foliage, Ilara felt even more wonderfully out of place. The beauty was almost surreal, a stark, silent contrast to the gritty, noisy landscape of her Chicago neighborhood. She was assigned to share a spacious suite with another junior employee from a different department, Sloane, a woman who was more outgoing, more worldly, and, as Ilara would soon discover, entirely self-absorbed. On the second night of the conference, after a grueling day of panels and networking events, Sloane approached Ilara with a conspiratorial grin and a request that seemed, on its surface, innocent enough. "Ellie, you are not going to believe this. You know that super hot tech guy from the venture capital firm we're trying to acquire? The one I pointed out? Well, he's here, and he just invited me out tonight." "I am freaking out," Sloane whispered, her voice a torrent of excitement. "But here's the thing. He wants to come back to my room later, you know, for a nightcap, and it would be super awkward with you here. Would you, please, just for tonight, swap rooms with me? My original room was a single. The company messed up the booking and I got it by mistake. It's just for tonight, I swear. We'll switch back tomorrow. Ilara, with her innate kindness and complete naivety regarding such machinations, saw no harm in the request, feeling genuinely happy for her. Colleagues' apparent romantic luck and not wanting to be an obstacle, she agreed instantly. Of course, Sloane, no problem at all. Go have fun. I'll just camp out in your room and we'll switch back in the morning. She had no way of knowing that this simple act of generosity was about to place her directly in the path of a surreal, life-altering misunderstanding. While Ilara, oblivious to the impending chaos, settled into Sloane's assigned room, intent on using the quiet evening to finally tackle a dense chapter in her pharmacology textbook, Julian Croft was touching down in a private helicopter on the resort's helipad. His face was a mask of fatigue from a last-minute business trip and irritation at having to attend a conference he considered a colossal waste of time. At the exclusive check-in, he was informed that his usual presidential suite was undergoing unexpected maintenance. As a result, the firm had secured him one of the best available lakefront suites, number 712. The way to his room, a text message from Finn lit up his phone. "Happy birthday a bit early, you miserable sod. Your special consultant is already waiting for you in suite 712. Hope you appreciate the gift. Try not to break her. Cheers, Finn." Julian sighed, a familiar wave of weariness and resignation washing over him. Another one of Finn's pathetic jokes. He pictured the predictable scene, a stunning woman, likely a model or aspiring actress, hired to perform a script of seductive conversation about topics that bored him to tears. Too exhausted to argue or even to bother dismissing the gift, he made his way to suite 712, the room originally assigned to Sloane, now occupied by the unsuspecting Ilara. Using the keycard given to him by the concierge, he pushed open the heavy wooden door, braced for the familiar, hollow performance. But the scene that greeted him shattered his cynical expectations into a million pieces. Instead of a woman in a provocative silk dress, champagne flute in hand and a practiced smile on her lips, he found a young woman of simple, serene appearance, clad in a modest pair of faded cotton pajama pants and an old university sweatshirt. She was curled up in a large armchair, her bare feet tucked underneath her, utterly absorbed in a thick, academic-looking hardcover, her dark hair piled into a messy bun from which several strands had escaped. The only light in the room came from a single reading lamp beside her, casting a warm, studious glow that was a violent contradiction to the suite's luxurious, sensual ambiance. At the sound of the door opening, Ilara looked up from her book, expecting to see Sloane returning early. But when her eyes met the imposing, unfamiliar figure of Julian Croft standing in her doorway, her expression of deep concentration dissolved instantly into a cocktail of shock, fear, and sheer disbelief. Her wide, intelligent brown eyes flew open, the heavy textbook on pharmacology slipped from her lap and hit the plush carpet with a dull thud, and her mouth formed a silent, astonished "Oh, what the hell do you think you're doing?" she finally cried out, her voice trembling with a mixture of panic and outrage as she instinctively pulled her knees to her chest, trying to make herself smaller. "Who are you? Get out of my room, now!" Julian, for his part, remained frozen in the doorway, his own mind struggling to compute the scene. Confusion was etched across his handsome features. This was most certainly not the special consultant Finn had promised. This woman, with her terrified eyes, her collegiate pajamas, and her fallen textbook, fit none of the archetypes he knew. "I'm sorry. I thought, isn't this suite 712? He stammered, feeling like a complete and utter fool, his customary arrogance evaporating into a cloud of profound embarrassment. The ensuing silence was thick, heavy, and fraught with a misunderstanding so colossal that neither of them knew how to begin unraveling. It was a collision born of a lie, a misunderstanding and a simple act of kindness, and its aftershocks were about to rewrite both of their lives. After a few seconds of a tense, surreal silence, it was Julian who finally managed to cobble together a coherent thought, though his mind was still reeling from the sheer strangeness of the situation. "The front desk gave me this key card, Suite 712. They told me it was my room," he said, holding up the plastic card as if it were evidence in a trial, his voice still laced with disbelief. Ilara stared at him, suspicion warring with the undeniable proof in his hand. "This is the room they gave me as well. I switched with a colleague. Just for tonight," she explained, her voice still trembling as she slowly, cautiously uncurled herself from the armchair, maintaining a safe distance. It was then that the truth dawned on them both, clumsy and embarrassing. A clerical error at the front desk, a confusion of names and suites, had thrown them together into this bizarre, mortifying scenario. The initial wave of relief that he wasn't an intruder or a madman was swiftly replaced in Ilara by a fresh, sickening tide of shame. The way he had looked at her upon entering, the clear expectation in his eyes, left no doubt as to what kind of person he had been anticipating. She had been mistaken for a prostitute. The thought made her feel nauseous, a deep, cellular humiliation spreading through her. Julian, seeing the shift in her expression, the horror and shame that now painted her face, felt a pang of something he rarely experienced, genuine remorse. "Look, miss," he began, his voice softening, "I am so sorry, truly. This is clearly a terrible misunderstanding. My associate, he has a deplorable sense of humor, and I was expecting someone else. I am deeply sorry if I frightened or offended you. I'll call the manager right now and get this straightened out." Without waiting for a reply, he turned, snatched the phone from its cradle, and with a brusque, authoritative tone that tolerated no argument, demanded the hotel's general manager rectify the situation immediately. As he spoke, his voice a low, angry growl of commands, Ilara just wished for the floor to open up and swallow her whole. The quiet evening she had planned had devolved into a nightmare of mortification, a silent humiliation she felt would be seared into her memory forever. The next morning, the image of Ilara's frightened, humiliated face was branded onto Julian's mind. He couldn't shake the memory of her vulnerability, the wounded dignity in her voice as she defended her space. The guilt, an unfamiliar and corrosive emotion, gnawed at him. Finn's joke had this time crossed a line, ensnaring an innocent and, he sensed, profoundly decent person. During breakfast in the resort's grand, wood-paneled dining room, he saw her from across the hall. She was sitting at a small table by a window, alone, her head bowed as she listlessly stirred a cup of tea. Her entire posture radiated a sadness and embarrassment that hit him with the force of a physical blow. She looked nothing like the women Finn usually procured. There was none of the calculated confidence, the studied sensuality, the desperate need for attention. There was only an aura of quiet intelligence, of simplicity, and a purity that intrigued him as much as it amplified his guilt. She didn't look like an escort, he thought, a tightness in his chest. She looked authentic, terrified but authentic. He felt an overwhelming urge to approach her, to apologize again, but hesitated, fearing his presence would only deepen her discomfort. Unable to dismiss the feeling and driven by a burgeoning curiosity about this enigmatic young woman, Julian did what he always did when he needed information. He investigated. The day after returning to Chicago, he discreetly tasked his head of security, a man of absolute loyalty and discretion, to compile a complete file on the employee named Ilara Vance from the Corporate Records Department. Within hours, a detailed summary lay on his desk, and every line he read only compounded his fascination and his shame. He learned of her humble origins in Pilsen, of her mother's death, of the sick grandmother she supported on a meager archivist's salary. He saw her perfect grades from a local public high school, the academic awards, and the note that she had withdrawn from her biology program at the University of Illinois at Chicago due to financial hardship. He read her performance reviews at Etelgard, diligent, punctual, but overly reserved, and shows little initiative for social integration. And through an informal channel, he learned of her secret dream to become a doctor and the second-hand textbooks she devoured in her spare time. Every detail painted a portrait of a woman of extraordinary strength, intelligence, and resilience. A woman who faced life's brutalities with a quiet dignity, never complaining, never asking for a handout. And he, in his cynical arrogance, had mistaken her for a call girl. The realization filled him with a profound sense of shame. And with that shame, a question began to form in his mind. A question that would haunt him for days. How can someone so seemingly invisible, so overlooked by the corporate world, possess a gaze so firm, so deep, so full of a light I haven't seen in anyone else? After days of an internal conflict that prevented him from focusing on a billion-dollar merger, Julian decided he couldn't let it go. He had to speak with her again, to apologize properly, personally, and perhaps, just perhaps, to understand a little more about the woman who, in one accidental encounter, had shaken the foundations of his perfectly controlled world. He summoned her to his office via a formal email from his assistant, requesting her presence to discuss a matter pertaining to the Wisconsin conference. Ilara received the email with a heart that hammered against her ribs. The fear of being fired, of being punished for the embarrassing incident, returned with a vengeance. As she stepped into the vast, intimidating presidential suite on the 95th floor, feeling as small and exposed as she had in that hotel room, she found a different Julian Croft. He wasn't behind his massive mahogany desk, shielded by his armor of power. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the expression on his face was not one of arrogance, but of an almost imperceptible nervousness. "Ilara, please sit down," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I asked you here because I need to apologize. Properly. What happened in that hotel room was a series of grotesque mistakes, and my initial reaction was that of an idiot. I walked in there expecting to find a tasteless joke from my friend, and I ended up frightening and offending you in a way that was unforgivable. I am truly sorry." The raw sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability in his posture, took her completely by surprise. I understand, Mr. Croft. It was a misunderstanding. I just want to forget that night. I was mistaken for something I could never and would never be," she replied, her voice still holding a trace of the original hurt. His admiration for her, already considerable, only deepened at her dignified response. He felt a growing need to know more, to peel back the layers of this woman who intrigued him so profoundly. "Ilara, if I may be so bold, I'd like to ask you something that has nothing to do with work or with what happened," he said, moving to sit in the armchair opposite her, closing the physical and hierarchical gap between them. "That night you were reading a book, a heavy one, on pharmacology. It made me curious. I saw in your file that you started studying biology but had to stop. Why read pharmacology for fun? It doesn't seem like light reading." The question, so personal and specific, seemed to breach her final defenses. She looked at him, and for the first time allowed a flicker of the passion she kept locked away to show in her eyes. "It's not a hobby, Mr. Croft. It's a dream," she confessed, her voice low but charged with an intensity that startled him. "My greatest dream, ever since I lost my mother to an illness that was found too late, is to become a doctor, to understand the human body not as a machine, but as a miracle, to understand disease so I can fight it, so I can save lives, so I can prevent others from feeling the pain I felt, but..." A sad, wistful smile touched her lips. "It's just a silly dream, I know. An impossible one. With my grandmother's illness and our expenses, I'll never have the money or the time to go back to school. It's a reality I've learned to live with." Her confession, the nobility of her dream, and the quiet resignation with which she spoke of its impossibility, struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. It awakened in him a new, powerful feeling that went far beyond simple admiration, a genuine, overwhelming desire to help this extraordinary woman fulfill her destiny. From that revealing conversation, an unlikely new chapter began. Julian, the man who had always viewed people as assets or liabilities, now found himself inventing reasons to keep her near. He began to draw her out of the archives and into the light. It started with formal invitations to operational meetings, using the excuse that he needed the perspective of someone on the ground to understand the company's real-world challenges. Ilara, though wary, accepted. To the astonishment of the table of vice presidents, her contributions were consistently insightful, intelligent, and rooted in a practical reality that their spreadsheets and data models often missed. Then he started assigning her to special projects, tasks far outside her job description. He asked her to help draft a new employee wellness initiative, to review the company's community outreach programs. She found his sudden interest in such soft topics strange, but he always had a disarming reason. "Ilara, you have something my executives with their Ivy League MBAs lack. Empathy," he told her once. "You see the human cost, the human benefit. That perspective is more valuable to me than any high-priced consultant I could hire." Ilara's heart, long dormant and shielded by layers of responsibility, began to beat differently whenever he was near. The respect she felt for his intelligence was becoming entangled with something warmer, more personal, more dangerous. She found herself thinking of him, replaying a shared laugh, a lingering glance. It terrified her. This was a road that led only to heartbreak. During a conversation on the company's rooftop garden, a small green oasis amidst the concrete jungle, their talk, as it often did, veered into more personal territory. "You're so different from anyone I know, Ilara," he said suddenly, his voice low, his eyes locked on hers. "The way you think, the way you see the world, your quiet strength, it's disarming." Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck. "Different how, Mr. Croft? Because I'm too real for your world of polished surfaces," she challenged, with a boldness that surprised even herself. He smiled, a genuine smile now full of a tenderness that melted her insides. "No, Ilara, not that. It's because lately I've started to think you're the only real thing in it." The intensity of his words, the vulnerability they revealed, cracked her, armor wide open. In that moment, she knew it was too late to turn back. A few days later, mustering a courage he hadn't needed in years, Julian invited her to a real dinner, away from the office. He chose a small, charming bistro in Old Town, a place with candlelit tables and a warm, romantic intimacy. Ilara went, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. In a clumsy gesture born of nerves, she knocked over a full glass of red wine, splashing it across the pristine white tablecloth. Mortification flooded her face, but to her astonishment, Julian threw his head back and laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to come from his soul. "Relax, Ilara, it's just wine," he chuckled, helping the waiter. "In my world, nobody makes me laugh like this. They're all too afraid of me to be simply human. Thank you for the chaos. I'm so tired of control." His kindness, in what felt like a disastrous moment, touched her more than any grand gesture ever could. But in the competitive ecosystem of Ethelgard, the increasingly visible bond between the all-powerful CEO and the humble archivist did not go unnoticed. It sparked a wildfire of venomous gossip. Malicious rumors of an affair with the boss began to circulate, tarnishing the reputation she had worked so hard to build on merit. One day, entering the gleaming marble women's restroom, Ilara overheard two senior managers. "Have you seen Croft's new pet project? The little archivist?" one said, her voice dripping with Disdain. They say her real skills are best demonstrated after hours, if you catch my drift. The other laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. Oh, I catch it. It's the oldest form of vertical integration in the book, a real corporate fairy tale. The words struck Ilara like a physical blow. She locked herself in a stall, silent tears of rage and humiliation streaming down her face, feeling dirty and powerless against a narrative she hadn't written. Hurt and furious, she stormed into Julian's office. Without being announced, her eyes red, her face a mask of pain that alarmed him. "Julian," she said, using his first name for the first time, "do you know what they're saying about me? That I'm only getting these opportunities because I'm your mistress?" The question hung in the air. His expression darkened. "Yes, Ilara, I know," he admitted, his voice low and heavy. His confession was another knife in her heart. "And you did nothing? You just let them? You let them destroy my name?" "I didn't." "Stop them, Ilara," he replied, rising and moving towards her, his gaze intense, blazing with an emotion she couldn't decipher. "And do you know why? Because any attempt to publicly defend you would only feed their narrative. It would confirm their suspicions. And because there's a kernel of truth in what they're saying, as twisted and malicious as it is." She stared at him, bewildered. "What truth?" "The truth that I am utterly and completely fascinated by you, that I seek out your company. Because it's the only thing that makes sense to me anymore. They're right that I have a special interest in you, Ilara. They're just wrong about the why. This isn't about power or a fling or a pet project. What I feel for you, it's the most real, profound, and terrifying thing I've ever felt in my entire life. And I will not apologize for it or hide from it because of what small, envious people whisper in hallways." His declaration, in its brutal honesty, left Ilara breathless. The love she had been trying to suppress rose up with overwhelming force, but so did the fear, the chasm that still separated their worlds. Seeing the storm in her eyes, he made a decision that would alter their destiny. "Ilara," he said, his voice now gentle, "I know your dream, and you have all the talent and dedication to achieve it. I have the means to send you to the best medical school in the country. Northwestern, UChicago, anywhere. Let me do this for you." The offer, though born of love, felt like a slap. It was her greatest fear realized, that he would try to solve her life with his money, turning her into his dependent, his charity case. "I can't, Julian," she said, her voice firm, her pride reasserting itself. "If I accept that, I prove them all right. I prove that I can be bought. I can't do that to my own dignity, and I won't do it to what I feel for you." He listened, his admiration for her integrity soaring. "Then what do we do, Ilara? I can't stand by and watch you bury that beautiful dream." I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. Then, after a long silence, a path appeared in her mind. A difficult, painful path, but one that could preserve them both. "I will accept your help, Julian, on one condition, one non-negotiable condition." He watched her, his expression intent. "We will have no romance, nothing. Not while I am your employee and not while you are funding my education. We will be partners, mentors, friends, whatever you want to call it. I need to do this on my own merit. I will not live in the shadow of your name. I will be Dr. Ilara Vance, a professional who earned her place in the world. And when I stand before you as your equal, then, and only then, will we see if this us is strong enough to survive time and distance." It was a staggering demand, requiring a patience and self-denial few men in his position would possess. But Julian, looking into the determined, tear-streaked eyes of the woman he now knew he loved, understood it was the only way. He nodded slowly. He would accept her terms. He would wait. The 7 years that followed were a quiet, sprawling epic written in the silent language of patience and the steadfast ink of a promise. It was a test not of passion, but of endurance. Julian, true to his word, became a ghost in Ilara's daily life, but a constant presence in her spirit. He adhered to the strict terms of their pact with a discipline that baffled those around him, transforming his yearning into a force for change. The Ethelgard Foundation for Community Health became his new obsession, a vessel for the values she had awakened in him. Finn O'Connell, his friend and COO, cornered him in his office one rainy Tuesday afternoon, tossing a financial report onto the vast mahogany desk. "I've just come from the quarterly review, Julian. Another 5% of profits diverted to your foundation. The board is starting to think you've lost your mind. They think you've found religion." He paused, his expression shifting from business to personal concern. "I think you have too. But it's not God you're praying to. It's been 5 years. You don't go out. You don't date. You live like a king in this glass tower, but you're a prisoner. Is she even real anymore? Or are you just in love with a memory, a promise made by a girl who has probably long since moved on?" Julian turned from the window, the city's grey panorama reflected in his eyes. He picked up a framed photo from his desk, the only personal item there. It wasn't of Ilara, but of the front of the small, vibrant community clinic in Pilsen his foundation had first funded. "She's not a memory, Finn. I spoke to her last night until 2 in the morning, he said, his voice low and steady. She was exhausted preparing for her board exams, terrified she would fail. She told me about a patient, an old man who reminded her of her grandmother, and how she held his hand for an hour because he was scared. She hasn't moved. She's moving towards something, and for the first time in my life, I'm not just acquiring things or waiting for the next deal. I'm building something, myself, and every decent brick I lay because of her. So no, she's not a memory. She's the only part of my life that feels completely, terrifyingly real." That very night, Ilara was hunched over a pile of textbooks in her cramped student apartment, the glow of a desk lamp illuminating the dark circles under her eyes. The phone rang, and a wave of relief washed over her. "Julian," she breathed into the receiver. "You sound tired, Dr. Vance." His voice, a deep and comforting rumble, filled her small room. "I'm tired of pretending I know anything," she confessed, the frustration of the last week pouring out of her. "There's so much, too much. What if I'm not good enough? What if I get out there and I fail them? People, Julian, real, breathing people who are trusting me. Tell me one thing you learned today," he said gently, not offering platitudes, but drawing her out as he always did. She spent the next hour explaining the intricate dance of neurotransmitters, and he listened, not just patiently, but with an active, absorbing interest, asking sharp, insightful questions that made her see the subject in a new light. Then it was his turn. He spoke of a frustrating negotiation, of the hollowness he still felt after a corporate victory. In these conversations, they were not a CEO and a student. They were simply Julian and Ilara, two souls tethered across a distance, their unspoken love hanging in the charged silence that settled after they said their goodbyes, a sweet, agonizing ache that fueled them both. Finally, the day arrived. The grand hall of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, rented for the medical school graduation, was filled with the scent of flowers and the buzz of 1,000 hopeful futures. Julian sat in the third row, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He watched the procession of robed figures searching for the only face that mattered. And then he saw her. She looked so small and yet so monumental in her dark green academic robes. He felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost choked him, mingled with a sudden sharp pang of fear. For 7 years, their love had been a perfectly preserved thing, an ideal nurtured in the sterile environment of distance and longing. What if the reality couldn't withstand the weight of such a long-held dream? When the dean called out, "Dr. Ilara Vance, magna cum laude," Julian was on his feet before he realized it, the applause around him a distant thunder. He saw her walk across the stage, a picture of grace and hard-won confidence. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and when they found his, a brilliant tear-filled smile broke across her face. In that single, silent exchange, the fear in his heart dissolved, replaced by a certainty that was as profound as the earth itself. The wait was over. After the ceremony, the crowd was a swirling vortex of hugs and popping champagne corks. He saw her approach, her beaming grandmother Maeve on her arm. Maeve, though frailer, had a light in her eyes he had never seen before. She looked directly at him. "A promise kept is a rare thing in this world, Mr. Croft," Maeve said, her voice raspy but strong. "You are a good man. My granddaughter, she has a good heart, and she chose well." She squeezed his hand, a gesture of profound acceptance and gratitude that sealed the final piece of his healing. Maeve moved aside to talk with other relatives, leaving Ilara and Julian standing together in their own quiet bubble. The air crackled with everything left unsaid for so long. "So," she said, her voice a little shaky, a radiant smile playing on her lips. "Dr. Vance, it has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" "It's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, his fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently brushing. A stray tear from her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her with such intimacy in 7 years. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes for a moment. "Every late night," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "every grueling exam, every moment I doubted I could go on, I was doing it for my mother's memory, for my grandmother, for myself, but I was also walking towards you, Julian. Every single step of this journey has been a step towards this moment." She opened her eyes, their deep, brown depths shining with love and conviction. "This diploma," she said, holding it up, "it isn't just paper and ink. It's my dignity, my independence. It's the fulfillment of my promise to you, and that makes it our freedom." He didn't need any more words. He closed the small gap between them and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion, but of deep, reverent homecoming. It was a kiss that tasted of saline tears, of shared sacrifice, and of a love that had not only survived the wait, but had been purified and strengthened by it. Epilogue. 2 years later, the Vance and Croft Community Health Center was more than just a building. It was the living, breathing heart of the Pilsen neighborhood. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the clinic was a hive of organized, compassionate chaos. Ilara, now the clinic's formidable medical director, moved through the halls with an energy that inspired everyone around her. Julian, as chairman of the board, was in a small conference room, deep in a tense budget meeting with the clinic's administrators. They were trying to figure out how to stretch their funding to cover a new, much-needed piece of diagnostic equipment. "We can reallocate from the discretionary fund," Julian argued, pointing to a line on a spreadsheet, "but it will mean pausing the planned renovations on the West Wing." Ilara, who had slipped into the back of the room, spoke up. "No, the families who use the West Wing have waited long enough for a more dignified space. We'll find another way." She looked at Julian, a challenge in her eyes. "We always do." He met her gaze, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Of course we will, Doctor," he conceded to the room. The meeting continued, but the tension had broken, their seamless partnership once again steering the ship. Later that evening, long after the last employee had gone home, the clinic was quiet. Julian found Ilara in her office, methodically wiping down her desk, the simple, humble act, a testament to the woman. She remained. He came up behind her and gently began to massage her tense shoulders. "You were brilliant today," he murmured into her hair. "You intimidate the board, you know. They're intimidated by a budget that prioritizes people over profit margins," she laughed, leaning back against him. "They'll get used to it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the rhythm of their breathing sinking in the quiet room. "Do you remember that first night?" he asked, his voice suddenly low and serious. "In that ridiculous, opulent hotel suite in Wisconsin?" "How could I forget?" she said softly. I was absolutely certain my life was over. The all-powerful CEO was going to have me fired for insubordination and poor taste in pajamas. That all-powerful CEO, Julian said, turning her around to face him, walked into that room expecting to find something empty and meaningless to distract him from his own hollow life. And instead, he found everything, the entire purpose of his existence. Standing there in a faded sweatshirt, armed with a pharmacology textbook and a look of terrified defiance. He stroked her face, his eyes full of a love that was now 9 years deep. He fell in love with her in that instant, and he's been waiting all this time to ask her properly as the man she has inspired him to become. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes as she saw him reach into his coat pocket. He didn't kneel. He stood before her as her equal. He opened a small velvet box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. I'm not asking you to be my partner in a project anymore, Ilara. I'm not asking you to be the brilliant doctor who works with me. I'm asking you to be my home for every day of the rest of my life. I was thinking it's time for one final promotion. He smiled, his own eyes glistening. From my favorite doctor to my wife, Dr. Ilara Vance Croft. What do you think? A home, she whispered through her happy tears. Julian, you've been my home since the day you laughed when I spilled wine all over that pristine white tablecloth. She threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she cried softly. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. And as they held each other in the quiet darkness of the clinic they had built, the lights of the Chicago skyline twinkling outside the window, they were no longer a story of a CEO and an archivist. They were a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with a mistake, a locked door, and the unexpected discovery of a life you never knew you were searching for.